Good afternoon to all of the online viewers, esteemed guests, members of the diplomatic community here in Washington, D.C., our followers and viewers around the world. As we celebrate May as World Trade Month, I'm very pleased to begin the calendar with the segment of Perspectives on Trade focused on Sweden. Due to an unexpected schedule conflict with the ambassador, we're honored to have with us Mr. Bjorn Arvidsson, head of the Trade and Economic Affairs at the Embassy of Sweden to the United States, as our guest speaker today in the ambassador's absence. My name is Andrew Gelfuso, and I'm director of the World Trade Center, Washington, D.C., and vice president of TCMA at the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center. The United States and Sweden have enjoyed over 200 years of strong diplomatic relations. The United States is Sweden's largest trading partner outside of Europe and the third largest export market for Swedish companies. This is a driving force behind job creation and growth for both nations. Sweden ranked number 32 among US trade partners in February, and it's not surprising that the three top US exports by value in February were mainly medical and health related. Sweden and the United States share a focus on innovation as a driving force in creating jobs, addressing new opportunities in areas like manufacturing, IT, and creative industries. Today, we look forward to learning more about various innovative industry sectors and the expansive trade and investment opportunities that Sweden has to offer. I'm very pleased to bring you this discussion in partnership with Nelson Garcia, CEO of the Washington Intergovernmental Professionals Group, or WIPG. For the past few years, we've worked with Nelson on organizing high-level conversations featuring congressional leaders and members of the diplomatic corps to offer our followers an in-depth and intimate look at business, trade, travel, and tourism opportunities in various regions of the world. Before I turn it to Nelson, I'd like to give you a bit of background about us. The World Trade Center DC is the trade programming arm of the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center. The Reagan Building is operated by a unique public-private partnership between Trade Center Management Associates and the U.S. General Services Administration. Additionally, we're part of the World Trade Center Association, a global network of over 300 centers in 100 countries around the world. Our mission is based on a congressional mandate to promote trade, diplomacy, and culture. Before Nelson begins the program, I would like to again thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hosting you and your colleagues at other programs we have in the pipeline. And now I would like to turn it over to my good friend, Mr. Nelson Garcia.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Welcome, everybody. I'm Nelson Garcia, president and founder of the Washington Intergovernmental Professional Group. We're an organization that was created back in 2009, mainly to reach out and work with newly elected members of Congress, as well as newly appointed ambassadors to the United States of America from embassies, countries all over the world. Normally, we would do this live over at the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center, and we hope to do it again soon. But due to the pandemic situation, we have been mainly doing Zoom events. But we hope to, again, do this live at a luncheon or a reception at the Reagan Building towards the end of the year. So keep an eye out on invitations dealing with future events over at the Ronald Reagan Building. Before I introduce our guest speaker today, I want to, again, thank Andrew Gelfuso, as well as his colleagues over at the Reagan Building, Allison McKithen and Jose Rashid, for their invaluable help and assistance and friendship to our organization and support in doing these programs for the past several years. At the same time, I would like to also thank Jenny Magyar at the Embassy of Sweden for organizing and helping put this event together from their end, and hopefully making this a very informative and successful event. And with that, let me go ahead and introduce our guest speaker today, Mr. Bjorn Arvidsson, Head of Trade and Economic Affairs at the Embassy of the Kingdom of Sweden in Washington, D.C. Mr. Arvidsson has served as Minister Counselor and Head of Trade and Economic Affairs at the Embassy of Sweden in Washington, D.C. since September of 2017. Mr. Arvidsson directs the Embassy's work on trade policy, business promotion, economic affairs, development, energy, and climate issues. Before arriving to Washington, D.C., Mr. Arvidsson spent 5 years in Brussels, heading the trade section of the permanent representation of Sweden to the European Union. In this capacity, he was the Swedish representative in the Council of the European Union's Trade Policy Committee, advising on trade issues, including the EU's negotiations with the United States, Japan, Canada, Mercosur, and other trade partners, as well as the multinational trade negotiations in the WTO. Previously, he worked as special advisor at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs and as international trade analyst at the National Board of Trade in Stockholm. He has also worked at the European Commission's Directorate General for Trade in Brussels. Mr. Arvidsson has a Master's of Arts in Political Science and a Bachelor of Science degree in Economics after studies at Lund University in Sweden and the University of California in Berkeley. More recently, he has completed a trade policy program at Harvard University, John F. Kennedy School of Government. He is married and has 2 sons. And with that, I'd like to welcome and thank Mr. Bjorn Arvidsson from the Embassy of Sweden.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nelson, and thanks for the kind introduction, and also thanks to Andrew and the colleagues. We're very excited to be here from the Swedish Embassy side. I think we were taking part of your events over the years. I think we would have been even more excited to be back in the Ronald Reagan Building, of course, and see you in person. But I think that will be just a matter of time until we're there again. And in the meantime, I think this is a very good opportunity for us to meet and discuss and have a conversation on important topics. So what I will do today in my introductory remarks is that I will cover 3 main areas. I will talk first a little bit about the economic ties between Sweden and the United States. Then I will switch and talk a little bit about sustainable business and trade and the links that we see between those areas, and also why we need an industry transition, in industry leading the transition to more climate-friendly technologies. And then finally, I will spend a few words on gender equality and why we think that is smart economics. So during my 4 years here at the embassy in the US, I have enjoyed many opportunities to meet with people from all around the country. And while doing that, I'm always struck by the diversity of people here in the US and the richness of your culture. And also, in fact, very much by the economic and historical ties between our countries. So just to mention that, I think Andrew referred to a few of these things, the relationship we have, but already in the 17th century, we had our first Swedes arriving to Delaware in the US. And then from the late 19th century to the early 20th century, actually 1.3 million people emigrated from Sweden to the US. So that was 1/3 of our population at the time. So quite substantial, I must say. And many of these people ended up in the Midwest, and there you still have a lot of traditions, Swedish traditions and Swedish names and so on. Today we have around 3.8 million Americans claiming Swedish descent. So there is still a lot of these people with sort of ties to Sweden. And politically, we collaborate on a range of issues, and that includes trade, it includes security, includes defense, and so on. And as most of you know, Sweden is a member of the European Union. We're also firmly committed to the United Nations, and we have a so-called enhanced opportunities partnership with NATO. So that means we also work quite close to the US on these issues. And of course, these other more the political relationship, the defense relationship they are very strong. But what I will focus more on today is more these economic ties that we have between our countries. As I said, the membership in the European Union, that's a cornerstone for us in our international engagement. And also Sweden being such an internationally oriented country, we also try very much to push the EU in a direction that we would like it to be when it comes to trade and economics. Exports account for almost, or a little bit more sometimes, than half of the Swedish GDP. And we're one of the most internationally integrated countries. And the US, as mentioned before, is our main export market outside of Europe. But I think even more significantly, and I want to highlight that to you, is our investment footprint in the US. Because, I mean, we're a small country when it comes to population. We're just 10 million people. We rank like number 90 in the world or something on population. But when it comes to investment in the US, FDI, we're actually larger than countries like China, Brazil, Korea, and so on. So we rank number 13 in the US when it comes to FDI. And that's something that I think you've all seen, because you know these names, the Swedish companies. Ericsson in the telecom sector, they've been here for over 100 years. we have other companies. We had Skanska in construction. We had Electrolux, our white goods manufacturer. They've been here since the 30s. IKEA opened their first store in 1985, and I think they have 50 stores now. And I was actually taking part in the opening of the 50th store, so that was quite exciting in US. You have other names as well. You have AstraZeneca, Saab, ABB, and so on. I could go on with this. But just to stop a moment on trade. I mean, again, we think this is very important, and unfortunately, we had some tensions in the past few years with the U.S. on trade. I think we're moving beyond that a little bit right now. We hear more positive signals on the transatlantic relationship, and we welcome that very much. The multilateral engagement from the U.S. will probably increase. There are still some barriers in place, some tariffs and other things that we would like to have lifted, but we're quite optimistic. And another thing that we see now, and that we also welcome, is that there is a large or a quite substantial emphasis on climate from the US. And here we see a link between these issues, between trade and between trade and climate and sustainability. And that is something that we want to expand from the European Union side. So turning a little bit then to climate agenda, the global efforts to fight climate change. Here I can say with some confidence that Sweden and the EU is very committed to that. And we were also very pleased with the Biden administration's announcement the other week that they will try to reduce the greenhouse gas pollution in 2030 with 50%, 50 to 52% compared to 2005 levels. So that is something we very much welcome. And also the previous commitment, or actually the US re-entering the Paris Agreement was, of course, very welcome also from our side. So now we look forward to working together with the US on this. The Swedish government, we actually set an even more ambitious target. We've said that we should be the world's first fossil-free welfare nation already by 2045 and 2045 and achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by then. And this is also something that the Swedish population is quite invested in. In fact, you see all these rankings all the time, and as an embassy, you like to see these things when you rank high. But one of the most recent ones I saw was from U.S. News and World Report. The ones who makes these college rankings also. They ranked countries for green living, and we ranked as the #1. And there are a number of these rankings where we actually rank very high on sustainability from the Swedish side. The Swedish population, as I said, they are invested in this. Only 1% of waste in Sweden from households go to landfills. The rest is either recycled or it's used to create energy. So that's something that we work well on. Also, we have the highest share of renewable energy in Sweden in the EU. And most of that comes from hydropower. We have a lot of rivers and other things, but we also have an increasing number or an increasing share of wind energy in our energy mix. All that is, of course, it's good for the world, but it's also in our own self-interest. That's why we're doing this, because as a country, we think this can help us with job creation, and we've also seen that over time. If we go back and we see the period between 1990 and 2017. Swedish economy grew by 71%, while our emissions decreased by 26%. So we actually had a large, uptick in our economy at the same time, seeing this reduction of emissions. So that is something that we've done well so far. But having said that, we of course need to do much more. It's not enough. We're not there yet. And what I would like to leave you with also in this part of my presentation is the role of industry in this. I know many of you are linked to business or working in different companies. We like this thing also that we heard from President Biden in his address to Congress the other week, when he was just referring to how much this can mean for job creation in the US, that you make this green transition. We actually believe the same thing in Sweden. Another example of this is the President Biden's climate summit that was hosted recently, And there he announced that the US would join something called the Leadership Group for Industry Transition. It's called LEAD IT. And that is a climate initiative founded by Sweden and India. And it takes the lead especially for the heavy industry transition. So sectors like steel production, cement production and all that, those are sectors where we currently have very large emissions. So if you can do something there, it can be very beneficial for reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement. Another thing we're doing in Sweden is that we have something called Fossil-Free Sweden, which is an initiative actually driven by industry. So you have a lot of companies and especially business sectors that set their own targets for how to reduce emissions. So they want to transition to net zero emissions. You have companies like the Volvo Group, IKEA, Skanska, and others. They have presented their own roadmaps for sectoral decarbonization. And that is something that I mentioned here also because the same companies are actually active in the US market. So, and they're not going to do this just only in Sweden, they will do this globally. So we actually think that this can actually benefit the US as well. If I take one even more concrete example of this is in another linked the end to the heavy industry and steel production. Here we have something called hybrid, and that is short for hydrogen breakthrough iron making technology. It's a short, difficult name to say, but this is a joint venture between the Swedish mining industry, the company LKAB, the Swedish steel producer SSAB, and the Swedish electricity provider Vattenfall. They have joined forces, and Vattenfall actually spoke at Biden's climate summit, President Biden's climate summit about this. They've joined forces, and the goal of this is to reduce and replace coal that has been used for hundreds of years in steel production to replace it with hydrogen instead. And by that, you reduce the CO2 emissions by a lot, and you basically decarbonize the whole sector. So we believe very much in that initiative. So moving on a bit, we're also doing things internationally in this area of climate. We have a lot of climate assistance, of course, through the Green Climate Fund and Global Environmental Facility. We also work with the US. We've done that with the previous administration and the administration before that. In Africa, trying to make the electrification in Africa more sustainable. Some of you might be aware of the initiative Power Africa, and this is part of it, and there we work well with the US. So we think that we're doing some good things, but we also think we need to do much more, as I said. And I think this emphasis that we have right now on what the industry can provide, I think that's the right way to go. So I really wanted to highlight that for you. Then before leaving the floor open for questions, I finally like to spend a few minutes on the case for gender equality and why we think that is smart economics in Sweden. I don't know if you're aware, but we have a feminist government in Sweden, a feminist foreign policy, as we call it. And this is a very clear position from the Prime Minister himself. And why do we do this? That we do it because the daily lives of women and girls, half the world's population, of course, are still marked by bias, by discrimination, and by subordination in different ways. So I would like to call your attention to what we call the 3 R's of the Swedish feminist foreign policy, the letter R. So those are rights, resources, and representation. So just a word first on the rights things. We see that over 100 countries in the world have laws preventing women from carrying out certain jobs. And 45 countries even lack laws against domestic violence. So there's a lot to do there on the right side. On the resources side, women today own less than 20% of the world's land resources. And in many countries, they're not allowed to own land at all. And if we take a more modern example with cell phones, for instance, we see that there are 300 fewer women today that own a mobile phone than men in the world. So we really think that we need to do better there. And then finally, on the representation side, only 12% of the countries in the world have a female head of state or government. So very few. And Sweden is, by the way, not one of them. We have a man as a prime minister, Stefan Löfven. So we can do better in that department, but I think we're still doing quite well in being a quite gender equal country. So why do we think this is smart economics then? The reason is that especially the labor force participation of women, that is something that is very valuable for our economy. The OECD, as you know, they do rankings and they do analysis of things like this. And they have shown that in the last 50 years in Sweden and in the rest of the Nordic countries, GDP has grown between 10 and 20% faster because that we have increased the participation so much of women in our labor force. So that's been very, very important for us. And also, I mean, this is not something we do only for women. This is also good for men and boys. Societies enjoy better health and stronger economies when you have this more participation of women. Still, of course, there are many things to do. We have to do better in Sweden on this. We have to do better internationally. But I think now, especially with the pandemic, we've seen that there's been actually a deterioration of this in the world. It's been becoming worse for women in many places. So that's another reason why we would like to highlight this, especially at this moment. So to conclude these three parts, the economic ties, I think I've tried to sort of send the message that they are already very strong, but we think we can do more. And we hope that some of you who listen, I mean, you can reach out to us. We think that we can work even more close to the US when it comes to innovation and green transition. We have this journey on trying to become this world's first fossil-free country. And then I think especially the industry part is very important. And then finally on this part on when we build back our economies, we need to be better in giving women a place by the table. So that's what I would like to leave you with, and I'm happy to be here and answer any questions that you might have. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Arvidsson, for your presentation. We truly appreciate you taking some of your valuable time on behalf of the ambassador to be with us this afternoon. Before we ask the questions, I would encourage all of our participants, if they have any questions, to please feel free to submit them using the icon at the bottom of your computer screen. You should see a Q&A section. And if you have any, please feel free to do so. We will get to them as much as we can with the time allotted for this program. And if not, if we aren't able to ask those questions, we will submit them directly to the embassy where they will follow up in the near future. So again, encourage anyone who has questions, please do so using the Q&A icon at the bottom. Mr. Arvidsson, I want to start off the question, coming off a little bit of what you were talking about, women's equality and women's rights. I think most Western industrialized democracies are suffering from a lack of population increase as a result of women joining the workforce and being a very strong presence in the workforce. And countries around the world, from the United States, Japan, and so forth, have seen a population decrease as a result of that. First of all, is Sweden seeing the same thing happening in your country? And how is that being balanced and addressed at the same time you are promoting equal participation by women in Sweden? And a second part to that question is, because of the migrants coming into the European continent, how successful have you been able to introduce them into the Swedish labor force to compensate for a potential loss of population in your country?
Thank you very much, Nelson. Those are good questions, of course. I wouldn't say that we have the same problem with the aging population in Sweden and in some other places. And the reason for that is actually is sort of linked to the second half of your question, which is migration, because we had a pretty substantial inflow of migrants to Sweden. So that's actually good for us when we're sort of supporting our elderly population. And also we have, reasonably high birth rates in Sweden, and higher than in other places. And I think that is also linked to other, our welfare state and opportunities to be home with kids, paternity leave and all that. So it's been, going quite well in that department for us. We're actually proud to become a double-digit country. We're over 10 million people now. So we've been growing in the past few years. So for us, that was something we jumped over that. And when it comes to migration, of course, I mean, it's always a challenge to integrate a new group, and especially to the labor market, which is very much the key to make people integrate. So this is difficult, I have to admit, but I think our model with this, high quality childcare, parental leave benefits, education without costs, including for higher education, and combined with some programs that we're sort of, launching also to try to do more, maybe more internships, these things. We were on the path to becoming even better on this, but it's a challenge that we're constantly working on. Thank you.
Thank you.
We had a question come in from Mario Brasi, and he was curious what the COVID situation is in Sweden, and if you would comment on that, please.
Yeah, no, it's been a challenge like in many places of the world. I mean, we have, too many people dying and too many people getting sick. Right now, I think there are around 14,000 people that died in Sweden, and there are around 1 million people who got the disease. And we've been doing a lot of things here. I think you've seen Sweden in the news, and sometimes it's sort of contrasted that we have this, no lockdown sort of path, and other countries are doing differently. I think one needs to look at this a bit differently. I mean, we're actually more similar than many people think to other countries. Of course, we've done things a bit differently. And I think one thing that stands out that's been quite good for us actually is that we kept the schools open, and that's worked quite well. Other things we could have done better. Especially protecting some of our elderly population in the initial phase of the pandemic and all that. So it's a situation that is still challenging. I think we're moving in the right direction. We're getting there now with vaccination. Unfortunately, we're not as fast as the US in sort of rolling out vaccination, but as it stands right now, we're going to be on the path to at least vaccinate the adult population during the summer, at least with one shot. So we're moving quite rapidly also in that. We would like to be even faster, but it's at least going in the right direction. Thank you.
If I may, while we're on COVID, I was also just curious how a small to mid-sized company can find a business partner in Sweden during COVID. Usually they're relying on trade shows or trade exhibitions, trade missions, the kind of work that you're very involved in or you have been in the past. And I'm just curious if what you've seen happening.
Yeah, that's another good question. I think it is much more challenging, as you say, Andrew. I mean, it's not, you can't jump a plane, you can't do the things that you need to do, can't get on the ground, which is normally what you need to do to sort of establish yourself and make the investment. But in the meantime, I mean, there are things that we try to do. We have a very active public-private organization in Sweden, and it's called Business Sweden, and they provide a lot of help in this situation. If you're interested in investing in the Swedish market, I think we work very well also with organizations like, you have World Trade Center around in the world, but you also have, for example, AmCham, the American Chamber of Commerce in Sweden, and the US Embassy. We all try to work, quite actively on that, trying to fill this void now when we can't travel. And also in the US market, I must say that we have a very, very good network of Swedish American Chambers of Commerce. So they are in at least 20 places. They're a good link with us at the embassy and our honorary consulates that we have around the country, and trying to be this link for business in situations, where you're interested in trade and investment in both directions. So difficult, but not impossible. And we're moving, also trying to move there. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Over to you, Nelson.
Hey, thank you. This next question comes from a good friend of mine, Jose Ladonio, a former diplomat at the Philippine Embassy here in Washington, who now is the manager of international government affairs over Abbott Laboratories. His question is, as a follow-up to the previous question, it has been reported lately that COVID cases in Sweden has increased, particularly among teens and younger children. Can you further discuss Sweden's COVID response, including testing, reopening of borders, and return of travel?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen an increased, number of cases, like in other places also among the younger population. I think what is good then, of course, is that you have less fatalities, but it's not, it's still not good, of course, that people get sick that are younger. When it comes to border things, I mean, these things are constantly changing. But right now there is a requirement. You need to have a COVID test for traveling to Sweden. You need to quarantine. You need to do the things that you have to do. And there's also, I mean, you can't access. I mean, it's not easy to travel from the US, for instance, to Sweden right now. Hopefully that will change again. But these things are, I mean, I'm happy to refer you to more resources after this meeting. It's a good question. Where government is still, doing many things. I mean, these things are, as I say, they are changing, but the restrictions in Sweden are quite, substantial right now. I think we're still with this 8 people limit on gatherings, for instance. It's not that you can have like large gatherings or anything else right now in Sweden. So So it's not, you can move around, but you still have to observe many restrictions, and it's also a lot have to do with the responsibility of the population to follow these rules that we have. Thanks.
Thank you.
I was curious how you see the U.S. and Swedish relationship evolving with the new Biden administration, in addition to climate change, which you did mention.
Yeah, I think it's been, I sort of alluded to it a little bit in my introduction. I think it's been a very good start for us with this new administration. In recent weeks, we had meetings with Energy Secretary Granholm. We had meetings with the Special Representative for Envoy for Climate, John Kerry. We met the U.S. Trade Representative, Catherine Tai. And in all this conversation, it's been a lot sort of focus on sustainability, this building back agenda that the U.S. has now, and something that we've been thinking about for a long time in Sweden. And I would just say that we had good relations also with the previous administration, with the Trump administration. But I think in this particular area with climate, I think we managed to sustainable issues move a little bit more even now. And we look forward to sort of deepening that a little bit more also. Now, of course, I mean, these meetings that I mentioned, they've been virtual. Eventually, when we can start traveling again, I mean, we would welcome very much, visits to Sweden, and we will have our politicians coming here as well. So I think it will develop more, but so far it's been very good with the Biden administration.
Thank you. Mr. Arvidsson, a question regarding, as I understand it, Sweden remains outside the Eurozone largely out of concern that joining the European Economic and Monetary Union would diminish the country's sovereignty over its welfare system. Do you foresee the country eventually joining the union in the future?
That's a hard question to answer, but I mean, if I can speculate a bit, I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, in fact, when we sort of signed, this, entering the treaty with this, we said that we're expected to join over time. I mean, so we have some sort of commitment to do that over time, but at the same time, there's also a consensus in the Swedish Parliament that for Sweden to join, there needs to be a new referendum on this. And we had a referendum back in 2003, and there was a pretty clear no at that time. And then if you look at polls on this, I mean, for a while it was, quite, popular thought among the population. But the most recent poll I think I've seen was like only 20% or something supporting. I think there was a bit of a downturn with the economic crisis some 10 years back in Europe. So right now, I don't really see that, that's going to happen soon, but you never know. So that's something as as a diplomat, you're always interested also what's going to happen politically in your own country. So, but I haven't picked up any signals that that's, something that is imminent.
Thank you.
Yeah, in your remarks, you had talked a little bit about trade tensions with the U.S. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on what those were.
Yeah. Sure. No, but we had a bit of a tariff escalation. I mean, not the same thing that the US had with China, but for instance, we had tariffs on steel and aluminum put on European Union together with some other countries, and with the excuse that it was for national security reasons. We actually don't believe that we're a security threat from the European Union side, so that's something that we'd like to see removed, and we think that would help a lot of the user industries also using steel on both sides of the Atlantic. Another thing is the long-standing sort of tensions because of the Airbus-Boeing dispute. I think many of you are aware of it. It's sort of air subsidies to aircraft manufacturing, and it's been clear that both sides have done things that they shouldn't have. But now because of that, we had an escalation on tariffs. Now, which is really good, I think, is that we have paused these tariffs from both sides, and we're trying to use 4 months to work it out. And hopefully, that will be something that could also help, because I mean, now there are other sectors that is really not linked to aircrafts that are targeted with these tariffs. And if these are removed, that would help a lot of our other industries also in the transatlantic relationship. So these are a few things. I mean, I think there was also some rhetorics going on from both sides. I think that's toned down a little bit. And I think that's also great, because then we can move to other important issues. We need to be better, in setting standards together, work together jointly on issues on trade.
Thank you.
Okay. Next question is regarding your current account surplus. Sweden currently enjoys about a 5% current account surplus of GDP, which is one of the highest margins in Europe. Has the COVID pandemic impacted that number going into 2022? Do you see a reduction in your current account surplus as a result of this pandemic?
It's also a good question. It's correct. We have this current account surplus, and we had it. It actually hasn't changed. I mean, it was the same in 2019 and 2020. What happened in 2020 actually is that both exports and imports decreased. So it's remained the same, even if, you know, overall you had it fell with 9%, both the exports and imports to Sweden and from Sweden. But the account, the surplus remained the same. And actually with the US, we managed to keep trade almost at the same level. So that was the rest of the world where we saw a quite substantial reduction. So that was a bit different. Going into 2021, 2022, not sure yet, but we're quite optimistic that we'll have our exports sort of, we see a bit of rebounding going on right now, and we hope that we will be competitive in the years to come also. Thanks.
Thank you. Andrew?
All right, this is the final question from my end. I was curious, you've talked a lot about FDI and what a great source of job creation in the US and Sweden, the fact that we have such a strong relationship has been. Could you just tell us what makes Sweden so attractive for US companies to base their regional offices?
I think there's again a mix of things. I mean, we have, you know, when people locate, they look at this holistically, you know, what can you get? I mean, if you have, you know, good living quality and good welfare systems and all that, that's good. But in certain sectors, you also need to have reliable energy, for instance, and we have that. We have cheap energy. You've seen a lot of like these data centers, these sort of modern things popping up in Sweden in recent years, and that's a lot to do with energy resources. You have green energy available. Another thing I think, and that's more related to, you know, the startups that we've seen that have grown very large, like, you know, Skype, for instance, or other in that sector, Minecraft, you know, the developers of this game, they were from Sweden. I think it's more like this sort of a bit of culture that you have, especially in some regions, some areas like Stockholm is you know, really a startup hub right now. So different clusters in Sweden, they have their you know, different strengths. We also have pharmaceutical industry in some areas and so on. So it's like in the US, it's not the same in the whole country, but I think in general, this, you know, sort of network we have, you know, the stability of the country, that helps a lot when you want to attract investments.
Thank you. And this will also be the last question from my end. But before I ask the question, I want to go ahead and again, thank you, Mr. Arvidsson, for stepping in at the last minute on behalf of Her Excellency, who had to return to Sweden at the last moment, and for providing a very comprehensive and detailed analysis of where our trade relationship is at this point in time. Again, I want to thank Jenny Major for her work in helping put this event together. And of course, my dear friends over at the Ronald Reagan Building, World Trade Center of Washington, D.C., to be precise, for their support and efforts in putting these great programs together. So the last question we have from here is, Swedish economists expect economic growth to ease slightly in the coming years as investment in the construction sector subsides. Where do you see investments begin to shift and take off as an alternative to the construction sector? Are we looking at biomedical, transportation, auto, or telecommunications, or something new totally?
Yeah, I will answer that. I would just first say that, you know, apologies on behalf of the ambassador. She really wanted to be here, but as Nelson mentioned, she's just in Europe and bouncing back again. So another time, I'm sure she will join you. And you know, we appreciate very much this event. So, and if anything, I can always connect you if you have more specific questions just to her also. But going back to your question, I mean, the investments, I mean, they're changing. You said, you know, we have the construction sector. I believe we will have a lot of, you know, public investments in areas like education, skills, infrastructure, also in this green transition that I referred to. That's an area where we sort of need to have public investment. When it comes to the private investment, I see more maybe, you know, digitalization, more of that, R&D. We're hopeful for that. And then, you know, linking back a little bit to Andrew and this, you know, question about Sweden investment, we have this entrepreneurial spirit, especially in the startup community. So there's some, venture capital, other things going into that sector also. So it's a mix of things. I don't see one clear sector being the target for investments going forward, but I think many areas are, and pharmaceuticals, life science. I mean, it was also mentioned here, I think, and that is also, Sweden and US, we're both advanced economies. I think you have a lot of export of these products from the US to Sweden. You have a lot of exports and investments from Sweden to the US. So it goes both ways. And that's a sector where I think will continue to grow in the years ahead. Hopefully we'll sort of deal with this pandemic, but that sector is always going to be important in our economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arvidsson. And Andrew, final words from you.
All right, Mr. Arvidsson, do you have any final thoughts to send us out on?
No, I think I gave you a few of them already in my previous remark, but it's great to have been here with you. And as I said, I mean, I appreciate this conversation. Look forward to meeting in person eventually. You're always welcome.
Yes.
We have the House of Sweden, which we're proud of. It's the embassy building here in DC at the Georgetown waterfront. We have exhibitions. We actually reopen a bit again slowly, so you can enter here. We have art exhibitions. It's open on the weekends for the public. So, that's not my part of the embassy, but I'm also very proud of it, and we're doing good things there also. So hopefully we'll see you around. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we learned a lot about Sweden today. First, the fossil-free country goals are amazing. Number one for green living. We know a lot more about Sweden than at least I do than I did yesterday, and I know our audience did. So on behalf of all of us, I'd just like to thank you so much for your time. To our audience, I hope that you'll visit our website at rrbitc.com and follow us at Reagan ITCDC for the latest information on our virtual programming. And I hope that you'll tune in on June 28th when we interview the ambassador of Switzerland. With that, I wish you all a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.